Our next speaker is Saskia Moraes, who is an MA candidate, a master's candidate at Monash University in Melbourne. Her master's thesis examines Greco-Roman ritual analogy and the relationship between action and meaning. And her paper today is called Same But Different, Frazer's Sympathetic Law of Similarity and the Greco-Roman defixiones.
Thanks for that, Caroline. Hopefully everything is looking and sounding okay for everyone. So as mentioned, I'm going to be talking to you about Frazer's sympathetic law of similarity and the Greco-Roman defixiones. So to give you an overview of how my paper will be structured, there'll be three parts. In the first, I'll go over Frazer's theory of sympathetic magic, which consists of the law of similarity and the law of contact. In the second, I'll review the reception and application of these sympathetic laws, in particular regarding Greco-Roman magical practice, and in particular the defixiones. And in the final section, we'll go through an analysis of 4 Greek and Roman curse tablets, which is the kind of English name for defixiones, which use certain textual formulas, and we'll analyze these considering whether similarity is a useful analytical tool. So in the third chapter of the abridged Golden Bough, this is dedicated to a discussion of so-called sympathetic magic and what Frazer describes as the principles of thought on which magic is based. So these principles of thought are neatly divided into 2 laws. On the one hand, the law of similarity, and on the other, the law of contact. So Frazer explains the law of similarity as the understanding that, quote, like produces like, or that an effect resembles its cause, end quote. And the law of contact is described as the belief that, quote, things which have been once in contact with each other continue to act on each other at a distance after the physical contact has been severed, end quote. So these 2 laws are assumed under the wider law of sympathy, and these form the basis of all magical behaviours according to Frazer. So today I will be focusing just on the law of similarity, as Frazer describes it, and its relevance to the study of Greco-Roman magic. Now, this label of magic, which is typically distinguished from religion, is a little problematic, but it is used liberally within scholarship. So for today's presentation, it's important that we understand that what we're really dealing with in this context are private, personally motivated rituals that are not technically sanctioned by religious authority, but which are religiously informed. So there's no real true separation between magic and religion going on here. Now, it would also be beyond the scope of my presentation to talk about the validity of the law of similarity as a whole, or indeed of Frazer's model of sympathetic magic in general. So Frazer describes his 2 laws of sympathetic magic as the mistaken reasoning under which all primitive ritual practitioners operate. And so the law of similarity is framed as a mistake in logic. You can see that Frazer writes, homeopathic magic commits the mistake of assuming that things which resemble each other are the same. The chief fallacy of the law of similarity, then, is assuming that likeness equals sameness. This goes along with the other pieces of flawed logic that we saw before, and these underpin these magical rituals and the reasons why they are performed. So according to Frazer, the most common use of the law of similarity is found in the ritual manipulation of figurines. The flawed reasoning at work in these cases is that just as the image suffers, so does the man, and that when it perishes, he must die. Frazer references many examples of figurine magic from different cultures, and the one on the screen here is supposedly from an Indigenous American context. Frazer notes that by drawing the figure of a person and then injuring it, a corresponding wound would be inflicted on the person represented. If death is desired, then the image can be burned or buried. And this is obviously a hostile use of the law of similarity, but Frazer also mentions what he calls beneficial uses of the law of similarity. These are usually healing rites, which relate to the idea between similarity of cause and effect. So the example on the slide is of one such healing use of similarity. Frazer recounts that the ancient Greeks believed in the curative powers of the stone curlew for a person with jaundice, and this was due to the similarity between the bird's yellow eyes and the jaundiced skin. A yellow stone was also believed to cure the disease, again because of the likeness in colour. So this hopefully gives you some idea of the working parts of Frazer's law of similarity and the types of examples that supposedly draw on this sympathy. So with this background, we can now turn to how scholarly debates on Greco-Roman magic approach this theory. So since the publication of the first volumes of the Golden Bough, Frazer's law of similarity has been used to explain certain ritual actions undertaken by practitioners from Greco-Roman contexts. The archaeological evidence we have for these magical rituals mostly consists of figurines and defixiones, which are more commonly called curse tablets. These curse tablets are essentially sheets of writing material, typically lead, but not always, which have been inscribed with a curse and then deposited in a ritually significant place. You can see an example of a curse tablet on the bottom right hand of the screen. So the texts that we find inscribed on curse tablets vary widely in terms of inscription length, in complexity, in terms of the material manipulation that has been applied to the tablet, and also the location of deposition. Based on the evidence, it seems that curse tablets were used for over 1,000 years across the Mediterranean by a wide range of people. So where Frazer enters the scene is that both figurines and curse tablets have been studied through the lens of his law of similarity. However, for a number of decades, there has been debate around the validity and usefulness of the law of similarity, and this discussion is ongoing. So on the one hand, some scholars draw on Frazer's model of sympathetic magic in studying Greco-Roman figurines and curse tablets. These curse tablets, their textual inscriptions, and also other aspects of the ritual, such as material manipulations, are understood in terms of the law of similarity in particular. Here you can see both the practice of curse tablets as a whole, being described in terms of Frazer's laws of sympathy, and also certain parts of this practice, for example, the simile formulas that we will analyse later on. These are seen also in terms of homeopathic magic specifically, and the law of similarity is described as having been salvaged. Also commonly found alongside ideas belonging to the law of similarity is the Latin phrase similia similibus, which essentially repeats the idea of like to like. This phrase was not coined by Frazer, however, it draws on understandings of homeopathy, and as a consequence, similia similibus and Frazer's law of similarity have become two strongly associated ideas. You can see that where one appears, the other is not far behind, and both operate under the assumption of a sympathetic force based on likeness. On the other side of this debate, some scholars explicitly reject Frazer's theories as an unsatisfactory explanation for these ritual practices. This rejection is found in particular regarding the manipulation of figurines, where the idea of resemblance as the motivating force behind this ritual action is challenged, especially when it comes to understanding the role of the ritual practitioner. So this debate is, of course, not restricted to the scholarship of Greco-Roman magic. Anthropology has, of course, also wrestled with Frazer's influence, and one such scholar who rejected Frazer's work, and in particular its social evolutionary ideas, was Stanley Tambiah. And Tambiah developed his persuasive analogy theory. This theory posits that in rituals where the label of sympathetic magic have traditionally been applied, these rituals instead use a combination of verbal and material action to transfer a very specific property from one object to the target, thereby bringing the two into a state of congruence. This transference of a certain property did not depend on a likeness between the two objects necessarily, or on the idea of sympathy, but this was instead achieved by word and deed, just like any other form of ritual. Tambiah was quite explicit in dismissing the idea of like to like, and this persuasive analogy theory has since been taken up by many scholars of ancient magic, including Greco-Roman magic, particularly amongst those that reject Frazer's sympathetic laws. So a shift away from Frazer to Tambiah is often said to have occurred within the discipline. And this shift is supposed to have nuanced our understanding of ancient magic. Though in truth, the debate around sympathy and sympathetic similarity is still ongoing. So the idea of like affecting like is especially prominent in the study of certain textual formulas found on Greco-Roman curse tablets. So these textual formulas, which usually compare one thing to another, have been categorized and labeled as similia similibus formulas, which is that Latin phrase that keeps being associated with Frazer's law of similarity. So on screen is just a general formula of this similia similibus phrase, and this gives you an overview of how these are structured sometimes. So the formula is just as blank is X, so may blank also be X. The first blank in this formula refers to the object which is manipulated within the ritual context, and the second blank refers to the target. Now, Frazer's law of similarity would approach these formulas as assuming that the object and target have an underlying likeness, which of course equals sameness, and that this allows the practitioner to sympathetically affect the target because like affects like. So in the next section of the presentation, we'll take a look at some of these so-called similia similibus formulas in order to question the validity of Frazer's law of similarity and the ideas of likeness for this particular form of evidence. So to get you thinking in terms of similarity, we can revisit the example from the Golden Bough that I showed you earlier. So here again is Frazer's account of an Indigenous American ritual, which uses figurines. And this ritual supposedly uses the law of similarity to be effective. I want to draw your attention to this part here that's highlighted, where apparently the ritual works just as well by considering any object as the target's body. If we are thinking in terms of resemblance and likeness, we can ask how it is that any object at all could have a perceived similarity to the target that connects them, and that can therefore be exploited in order to sympathetically affect the target. So, turning away from this example, the types of objects that we find referenced in the Greco-Roman formulas can also vary quite a bit. So I'll show you some examples which draw on a few of these possible options. So this Greek curse tablet from the Attic region uses text as the manipulated object. We know this because the inscription states, just as these letters are jumbled up, so too of Proton the market woman be jumbled up all things. The jumbled letters that this formula refers to appear here in the inscription on the right in the Greek original. So this jumbled section is actually two names, one of a target and one of a target's father. So these names that have been jumbled are only 2 out of a possible 6 in this inscription. So clearly each person's name was not required to be written out jumbled for this ritual to work. If we're thinking in terms of Frazer's law of similarity, we can ask whether there is any resemblance between these letters, either in a general sense or in the specific case of the letters of somebody else's name and not your own, that will be able to sympathetically render you into a jumbled state. We can look at another example to question this further. So this curse tablet also involves text as a manipulated object. So this tablet is from Athens and dates to the 3rd century CE. The textual formula in this inscription asks for Hermianos to grow chilled, as well as his race, name, soul, power, motivation, and glory. The names which are to be chilled, as per the formula, refer to certain magical and powerful names earlier in the text, which you can see here represented in capital letters. So the method of making these names chilled comes as a result of the deposition of this curse tablet. This tablet was in fact excavated from inside a well, which would make the tablet and its inscription cold from the water. As with the previous example, we can ask in what ways these powerful names are similar to things like the race and the glory of Hermianos. Some of the targets of this curse tablet are quite abstract. So in that case, how do we determine the resemblance to the thing that it's been compared to? We can also have a look at a different type of manipulated object to analyze this further. In this curse tablet from Carthage, we have an example of animals being used as the manipulated object. Instead of an anthropomorphic figurine representing the target, we have instead a rooster being manipulated by the ritual practitioner. Here, the formula states that just as the practitioner ripped out and transfixed the tongue of the rooster, so should the tongues of their enemies be struck mute. Now, when it comes to figurines, usually the general anthropomorphic shape is considered to be enough of a resemblance to satisfy Frazer's law of similarity. Whether a rooster has sufficient likeness to the opposing litigants that are being targeted in this curse tablet might depend on your own opinion of roosters and people. What's interesting about this formula in particular, however, is that the specific qualities that are being highlighted by this curse tablet are not quite equivalent. We have ripped out and transfixed in one case, but struck mute in the other. So there seems to be some flexibility in terms of the intended effect of the ritual and how this relates to the action. It's not exactly a one-to-one replication of a state of being. So for the final curse tablet, we will examine this one from Montfort, dating to the 1st century CE. In this formula, the lead curse tablet itself is functioning as the manipulated object. The formula in this inscription states that just as this lead is not visible and sinks to the bottom, so may the youth, limbs, life, livestock, grain, and trades of those who deceive the ritual practitioner also fall into decay. The method of making the lead not visible and sinking in this case was once again by depositing it inside a well. We can also see that this falling action is not applied literally to the targets of the ritual, but in the more abstract sense of an economic or general downturn. It's also interesting that the property of being not visible is not transferred to the target. Thinking once again in terms of similarity, we can consider how lead might resemble, for instance, the grain and livestock of this person's enemies, if indeed this likeness is what is motivating these textual formulas, how they're constructed, and their associated ritual actions. So having looked at just 4 examples of curse tablets with these similia similibus formulas, and there are many more out there, you can perhaps see that the things that they are targeting can be quite abstract, things which certainly have no physical appearance and perhaps no symbolic or metaphorical similarity in order to resemble the things that they are being connected with in these phrases. The objects that are being manipulated within the ritual context might also seem like surprising choices for you. For example, text or lead seem like interesting objects. And if indeed these practitioners are operating under the assumption of like affects like, why are they choosing them? What guides the choice of manipulated objects if it's not a perceived similarity? Well, the likeliest answer is that most of these analogical phrases are making use of objects or actions that were already part of conventional cursing and magical rituals. Objects such as curse tablets and their inscriptions and sacrificial animals were already in general being used in these rituals, as were actions such as deposition in graves or in wells, as these were strategies that aimed at connecting the practitioner with the underworld powers that were associated with these specific vocations. So these ritual practitioners seem to have co-opted and taken advantage of what was already there in the ritual context, rather than seeking out objects and actions specifically because they had a likeness to the target of the ritual. So why does this matter? Well, it tells us what these similia similibus formulas were using to affect the target. And if these objects or actions weren't selected because of a perceived similarity, then maybe we need to rethink how they were used, why they were thought to work, and whether similarity makes sense. So now comes the thorny question. Is there actually any use for Frazer's law of similarity when it comes to the Greco-Roman curse tablets? Does like affects like makes sense as an explanation if there was not much of a likeness beforehand, or if likeness was seemingly not the motivating force behind these textual formulas. So Frazer's influence remains strong in the study of Greco-Roman magical practice. And if we want to move beyond the law of similarity, we perhaps need to reconsider our thinking and our use of these ideas, and really question whether this improves our understanding of the ancient practice as it is presented in the archaeological record. There perhaps needs to be an increasing consideration of the ritual practitioner, of their words and actions as producing these ritual effects, just like Tambiah argued. So maybe an approach that is closer to something like ritual agent produces like, or ritual action produces like, might be better suited, though not perfect, for our analysis. This way, we can still maintain our focus on the very specific and sometimes abstract trait which will be transferred and shared. And this is really the goal of these ritual actions. But we can do this without holding on to the idea that a sympathy or a resemblance between disparate objects is what motivates the construction and execution of these ritual actions. And hopefully by adopting such an approach, we can also continue to situate these ritual actions within the context of more normative forms, such as prayers, sacrifices, and public oath rituals, which could sometimes involve the very same behaviours, just in different contexts. And so in this way, the arbitrary line between magic and religion, which we find in the subtitle of the Golden Bough, can maybe be weakened further still. Thanks for your attention.